Hey, what's up? This video is a follow-up from my last atheist video where I talked a little bit about new atheism, probably in a somewhat obtuse fashion. I know I probably could have taken notes and done better on it, but anyway, this is a response to a long comment that Absque Religione posted. I think I'm getting that right. I don't speak Latin, sorry. But there were just a few points that I wanted to pick out of there, some things I wanted to clarify and address in this video. And I guess the first thing I want to say is that much like pretty much every other atheist response to a video on YouTube, this particular comment was filled with disrespectful ad hominem remarks. And it was quite untactful and just resentful all around. And that's very characteristic of atheists, new atheists in particular. They tend to be thin-skinned and they anger very easily. And one thing about someone who angers very easily is that he's not very confident in his position. He hasn't given sufficient thought to it in order to defend it without insulting someone. Atheists generally can't just attack the content. They have to attack the person, and that's one of the main indicators of ignorance. So maybe that says something about, I'd like to defend atheists sometimes in that I believe they can have a decent moral framework by which to live, apart from organized religion. I do think that there are religious substructures at the foundations of our culture that we don't really realize that underlie lots of our actions and our conceptions of good and evil. And you don't have to attribute that to organized religion if you don't want to, but you go far back enough in history, and it did come from some religious group or agreement or some religious system of some sort, and it's archetypal in nature, I would say. But anyway, just want to pick out a few points that were in that comment and clarify those problems, because I think they are general questions that atheists raise. And luckily enough for you and for the other viewers, I'm a reasonable enough guy to not be affected emotionally by your ad hominem remarks. I can pick out the content and separate that from all the shenanigans that was in the comment. So the first thing, I'll get right into it. The first thing was about, there was some confusion over the definition of the nature of God. The commenter seemed to be equating the nature of God with nature out there in the woods. Like he said, the nature of God is nature. Okay, fair enough. I can kind of see maybe what you mean by that. But when I say the nature of God, what I mean is the philosophical investigation of God. Philosophy generally explores the nature of things, the fundamental part of its being, its essence, the concept in the raw, so to speak. So now, that's easy to determine if you're a materialist. You understand the nature of anything if you're a materialist, right? Because everything's founded in matter, down to its most fundamental part. That's matter. It's, subatomic particles, I guess. But, the problem with that already is that you delve deeply enough into that realm, things become so crazy and chaotic that literally no one can understand them. And, we can't... We can't magnify our understanding of something down to the level that we would need to like really grasp the meaning of whatever is going on down there is. I don't know if that's clear, but anyway, if materialism is true, if all reality is founded in material stuff and nothing more, and there's no subjectivity, there's no meaning, there's no purpose, there are no goals that we act toward, blah, 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 no free will, etc., then there's no point of doing philosophy. And I don't think that's true at all. I think philosophy has a very important role in today's society, probably more so now than ever. And philosophy and critical thinking is hugely important because things are getting crazy right now, aren't they? And say what you want about that, but I guess why materialism doesn't work is a very big topic, and there are people who have done that very well. But just to keep a long story short, I'll leave you with a pragmatic approach to that. Go out and try to live according to materialism, scientific or philosophical materialism. Go out and try to act as if you don't have a mind, as if everything is nature rather than nurture. What you're going to get there is determinism, that everything is predetermined, and that you don't have to take responsibility for anything in your life. And that could lead you down a very dark path, to keep a long story short. And also, it's going to produce something that many of the new atheists and the materialists, especially in the public sphere, aren't going to like very much. And it's that you're not allowed to take credit for anything. If you don't have a mind and you don't have free will and everything's predetermined, then you're not allowed to take credit for anything. And trust me, those new atheists and materialist scientists out there who are sort of the faces of science and atheism, Richard Dawkins, Chris Hitchens, Neil deGrasse Tyson, just to name a few, those guys are so damn arrogant. They don't want to not be able to take credit for anything. It's not humbling to them. It would burn them up inside. They would absolutely implode. They would have no meaning or purpose in their life. That would be the point, that they realize that they're nothing. Lawrence Krauss has that talk, why is there something rather than nothing, and it's humbling to know that you're just a speck in the universe and that you mean nothing. It's like, really? Try to act as if you actually believe that and see what happens. And I'll leave you with that right there. On the ontology and existence of God. Okay, so it is an important issue. I'm not saying it's not important at all, but in order to argue about the ontology or existence of God, one must know something about its nature. You don't have to understand its fundamental being necessarily, like in a deeply philosophical sense. That's why those things are still up for debate, right? But we can discover something about its nature based on usage, from a pragmatic point of view. How do we use God as a tool to, as a moral framework to better yourself, to face the unknown, to pit good against evil, and try to allow good to win out in your life, and that'll come down to free will. And we can discuss science. We can discuss science in the same way. It's through usage that we understand something about the nature of science. Obviously, the nature of science in itself is something that philosophers are still debating to this day to a very large extent. Some of them rightly, and some of them seem to miss some big issues on the topic. But it's through usage that we understand, as much as we can as much as we do about science, and that can be good, which means we would be using it as a tool to better ourselves and better society, but not better ourselves in the same way that morals better ourselves, in more of a physiological way, of course, in a more material way, empirical way. Or it can be bad, just like religion can be. It can delve into dogma, and materialists pretty much are on that boat, and new atheists too, for that matter. So it's through usage. It's through a pragmatic approach to something that we can determine whether it's good or evil, right? Or good or bad or whatever. So there was another part of the comment about atheism not being a belief system, as atheism being simply a reactive position to theism and the problems with theism. But I'm still not convinced that atheists understand the real problems with theism. And I think I'll tell you right now, I think the problems with theism boil down to the individual. There are no systems that are in and of themselves bad or corrupt or evil. That's a human trait, to be bad or corrupt or evil. It's a trait of something or someone who has free will to be good or bad or poor or evil or whatever. So, yeah, it's kind of just to miss the point. It's like if you, let's see, if you take atheism as a purely reactive position and not as a point of view, so to speak, or a belief structure, that's to do so without regard to the values that religion has ingrained in us and in our culture. And religion has set the substructure for Western society, in fact. Look at Western Judeo-Christian cultures. They tend to be the least corrupt on average. They have their fair share of problems, of course, but they tend to be the least corrupt and the least violent and least insane cultures in the world, And then we've seen in the 20th century what happens when you try to build a purely secular society. Everyone dies. That's what fascist Germany was. That's what the Soviet Union was. That's what Maoist China was. Over 100 million people died as a result of secular thinking, because Nietzsche, when Nietzsche announced the death of God, he was worried that people would, they've taken the moral substructure out from under themselves, out from under their culture, and so they wouldn't know how to act, they wouldn't know how to live. But I think he wrongly thought that humans would be able to create new values on their own, secular values, and that's what the Soviets and the Maoists did in China. And we saw the result of that. So, anyway, atheism only becomes proactive when it decides to project fault onto the system itself rather than to individuals. So it's to miss the whole point about individuality, which is what Western society is based on, and is what Christianity and Western religions are based on. That you have an individual choice to do good or evil, and if you do good, then you'll be rewarded, and generally you are, and to do bad, you won't get away with it, generally speaking. And there's even a doctrine in the East that will agree with that, and that is the concept of karma. If you make the wrong moral decisions, you're not going to get away with it, and generally you don't. It doesn't really pain me to say this, but I grew up in Louisiana, not far from New Orleans, and when Katrina hit, I didn't really feel sorry for anyone. Maybe a few individuals, but I didn't feel sorry for New Orleans on the whole. I didn't pray for New Orleans. I didn't, look, this was the problem. The hurricane didn't cause the levees to break. Corruption caused the levees to break, and that's what flood myths are all about. It was a typical flood myth. Things get corrupt enough, which they were and still are in Louisiana. Louisiana is the most politically corrupt state in the Union. God will send a flood. That's the idea. You don't have to attribute that to God, the guy in the sky. That's not what God is, really. But two questions arise whenever something like that happens. Something in nature, something that so many people perceive to be horrible, but really it was the result, directly or indirectly, of humans being careless or reckless or immoral, and which Louisiana certainly is. All of those things. New Orleans in particular. I mean, Jesus Christ, man, it's sin fucking city, Two questions arise there. It's first, why did this happen? And don't attribute it to nature. Don't attribute it to anything other than yourself and your own poor decisions. Take responsibility for it. you know? And then the second question is, what are you going to do about it so that it doesn't happen again? And that means act better, you know, on every level of analysis that you possibly can. Make yourself better first. You know, you have your own problems to fix. Don't go fuck up someone else's life, you know, if yours is fucked up already, you know. You can't help anyone if you can't help yourself, truly, you know. So help yourself, and then help your friends and family, and then help your community, and then help the world if you want to, you know. If you get to that point, because it's difficult to get to the point where you straighten everything out in your own life, in your immediate circle, you know. So that's what religion is really about, you know. Look, but atheists tend to punish the whole class because a couple kids are misbehaving, and those couple kids are the fundamentalists. And yeah, the fundamentalists are crazy and radical and don't know what the hell they're talking about. No one should say otherwise, you know. But the reality is that this concept of good versus evil is a real thing, and it's very, very old. It's been around as long as humans have existed and have had language and been drawing pictures, you know, painting pictures on cave walls. And like so it depends what you do with it, and it comes down to your free will as to whether or not something is good or evil, especially a structure like religion. And look, science can be viewed as good or evil in that regard too. You know, you can either cure disease or make an atom bomb. And even then, curing diseases isn't always a morally good thing either, depending on how you manage that. And making an atom bomb isn't always a bad thing, depending on how you manage that too, right? It'll always be a bad thing on some level of analysis, just like curing disease will always be a good thing on some level of analysis, but you know what I mean, right? So good versus evil is an undeniable reality, and it lies at the bottom of all religious narratives. It's embodied in all religious narratives, universally, cross-culturally, everywhere. So also one thing that atheists like to do is punish the whole class because a couple kids are misbehaving, in terms of like that universal cross-religious idea as well, because Islam is so, you know, corrupt and produces so much violence. Well, it's a religion, and Christianity's a religion, and it shares some things in common. So Christianity must be a huge problem too. And so you just the atheists tend to just lump all of the religions together and call them bad. You know, well, it's easy to rid yourself of responsibility. But, you know, is it true? I'm not buying it. So maybe I'll do a follow-up depending on how the response is to this, but I think this video is probably a lot better than the last. So tell me what you think, because I actually took notes this time. Yeah. So tell me what you think in the comments below, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.